11.1.3 Life History Variation. Populations evolved to maximize their reproductive fitness, also called Darwinian fitness, high R value, in the habitat in which they live. Under a particular set of selection pressures, organisms evolve towards the most efficient reproductive strategy. Some organisms breed only once in their lifetime, for example, Pacific salmon fish and bamboo, while others breed many times during their lifetime, for example, most birds and mammals. Some produce a large number of small sized offspring, for example, oysters and pelagic fishes, while others produce a small number of large sized offspring, for example, birds and mammals. So, which is desirable for maximizing fitness? Ecologists suggest that life history traits of organisms have evolved in relation to the constraints imposed by the abiotic and biotic components of the habitat in which they live. Evolution of life history traits in different species is currently an important area of research being conducted by ecologists. 11.1.4 Population Interactions. Can you think of any natural habitat on Earth that is inhabited just by a single species? There is no such habitat, and such a situation is even inconceivable. For any species, the minimal requirement is one more species on which it can feed. Even a plant species which makes its own food cannot survive alone. It needs soil microbes to break down the organic matter in soil and return the inorganic nutrients for absorption. And then, how will the plant manage pollination without an animal agent? It is obvious that in nature, animals, plants, and microbes do not and cannot live in isolation but interact in various ways to form a biological community. Even in a minimal communities, many interactive linkages exist, although all may not be readily apparent. Interspecific interactions arises from the interaction of populations of two different species. They could be beneficial, detrimental, or neutral, that is neither harm nor benefit to one of the species or both. Assigning a plus sign for beneficial interaction whereas a minus sign for detrimental and 0 for a neutral interaction, let us look at all the possible outcomes of interspecific interaction, table 11.1. Both the species benefit in mutualism, that is plus plus, and both lose in competition, that is a minus minus, in their interactions with each other. In both parasitism and predation, only one species benefits, parasite and predator respectively, and the interaction is detrimental to the other species, host and prey respectively, that is plus minus. The interaction where one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed is called commensalism, that is plus 0. In amensalism, on the other hand, one species is harmed whereas the other is unaffected, that is minus 0. Predation, parasitism, commensalism share a common characteristic: the interacting species live closely together. Number 1. Predation. What would happen to all the energy fixed by autotrophic organism if the community has no animals to eat the plants? Can you think of predation as nature's way of transferring to higher trophic levels the energy fixed by plants? When we think of predator and prey, most probably it is the tiger and the deer that readily come to our mind. But a sparrow eating any seed is no less a predator. Although animals eating plants are categorized separately as herbivores, they are in a broad ecological context not very different from predators. Besides acting as conduits for energy transfer across trophic levels, predators play other important roles. They keep prey population under control. But for predators, prey species could achieve very high population densities and cause ecosystem instability. When certain exotic species are introduced into a geographical area, they become invasive and start spreading fast because the invaded land does not have its natural predators. The prickly pear cactus, introduced into Australia in the early 1920s, caused havoc by spreading rapidly into millions of hectares of rangeland. Finally, the invasive cactus was brought under control only after a cactus feeding predator, a moth, from its natural habitat was introduced into the country. Biological control methods adopted in agricultural pest control are based on the ability of the predator to regulate prey population. Predators also help in maintaining species diversity in a community by reducing the intensity of competition among competing prey species. In the rocky intertidal communities of the American Pacific coast, the starfish pisaster is an important predator. In a field of experiment, when all the starfish were removed from an enclosed intertidal area, more than 10 species of invertebrates became extinct within a year because of interspecific competition. If a predator is too efficient and overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct, and following it, the predator will also become extinct for lack of food. This is the reason why predators in nature are prudent. Prey species have evolved various defenses to lessen the impact of predation. Some species of insects and frogs are cryptically colored, that is, they so camouflaged to avoid being detected easily by the predator. Some are poisonous and therefore avoided by the predators. The monarch butterfly is highly distasteful to its predator, that is bird, because of a special chemical present in its body. Interestingly, the butterfly acquires this chemical during its caterpillar stage by feeding on a poisonous weed. For plants, herbivores are the predators. Nearly 25% of all insects are known to be phytophagous, that is, feeding on plant sap and other parts of plants. The problem is particularly severe for plants because, unlike animals, they cannot run away from their predators. Plants, therefore, have evolved an astonishing variety of morphological and chemical defenses against herbivores. Thorns, found in acacia cactus, are the most common morphological means of defense. Many plants produce and store chemicals that make the herbivore sick when they are eaten, inhibit feeding or digestion, disrupt its reduction, or even kill it. You must have seen the weed calotropis growing in abandoned fields. The plant produces highly poisonous cardiac glycosides, and that is why you never see any cattle or goats browsing on this plant. A wide variety of chemical substances that we extract from plants on a commercial scale, that is nicotine, caffeine, quinine, strychnine, opium, etc., are produced by them actually as defenses against grazers and browsers. When Darwin spoke of the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest in nature, he was convinced that interspecific competition is a potent force in organic evolution. It is generally believed that competition occurs when closely related species compete for the same resources that are limiting, but this is not entirely true. Firstly, totally unrelated species could also compete for the same resources. For instance, in some shallow South American lakes, visiting flamingos and resident fishes compete for their common food, the zooplankton in the lake. Secondly, resources need not to be limiting for competition to occur. In interspecific competition, the feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering and inhibitory presence of the other species, even if resources, that is, food and space, are abundant. Therefore, competition is best defined as a process in which the fitness of one species, measured in the terms of its R, the intrinsic rate of increase, is significantly lowered in the presence of another species. It is relatively easy to demonstrate in laboratory experiments, as Gauss and other experimental ecologists did. When resources are limited, the competitively superior species will eventually eliminate the other species, but evidence for such competitive exclusion occurring in nature is not always conclusive. Strong and persuasive circumstantial evidence does exist, however, in some cases. The Abingdon tortoise in Galapagos Islands became extinct within a decade after goats were introduced on the island, apparently due to the greater browsing efficiency of the goats. Another evidence for the occurrence of competition in nature comes from what is called competitive release. A species whose distribution is constricted to a small geographical area because of the presence of a competitively superior species is found to expand its distributional range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. Cornell's elegant field experiment showed that on the rocky sea coast of Scotland, the larger and competitively superior barnacle balanus dominates the intertidal area and excludes the smaller barnacle Chathamalus from that zone. In general, herbivores and plants appear to be more adversely affected by competition than carnivores. Gauss' competitive exclusion principle states that two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot coexist indefinitely, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. This may be true if resources are limiting but not otherwise. More recent studies do not support such gross generalizations about competition. While they do not rule out the occurrence of interspecific competition in nature, they point out that species facing competition might evolve mechanisms that promote coexistence rather than exclusion. One such mechanism is resource partitioning. If two species compete for the same resource, they could avoid competition by choosing, for instance, different times for feeding or different foraging patterns. MacArthur showed that five closely related species of warblers living on the same tree were able to avoid competition and coexist due to the behavioral differences in their foraging activities. Number 3, parasitism. Considering that the parasitic mode of life ensures free lodging and meals, it is not surprising that parasitism has evolved in so many taxonomic groups from plants to higher vertebrates. Many parasites have evolved to be host specific, that is, they can parasitize only a single species of host in such a way that both host and the parasite tend to co evolve. That is, if the host evolves a special mechanism for rejecting or resisting the parasite has to evolve mechanism to counteract and neutralize them in order to be successful with the same host species. In accordance with their lifestyles, parasites evolved special adaptations such as the loss of unnecessary sense organs, presence of adhesive organs or suckers to cling onto the host, and loss of digestive system and high reproductive capacity. The life cycles of parasites are often complex, involving one or two intermediate hosts or vectors to facilitate parasitization of its primary host. The human liver fluke, a trematode parasite, depends on two intermediate hosts, a snail and a fish, to complete its life cycle. The malarial parasite needs a vector, that is mosquito, to spread to other hosts. Majority of the parasites harm the host. They may reduce the survival, growth and reproduction of the host and reduce its population density. They might render the host more vulnerable to predation by making it physically weak. Do you believe that an ideal parasite should be able to thrive within the host without harming it? Then why did natural selection lead to evolution of such totally harmless parasites? Parasites that feed on the external surface of the host organisms are called ectoparasites. The most familiar examples of this group are the lice on humans and ticks on dogs. Many marine fish are infested with ectoparasite copepods. Cuscuta, a parasitic plant that is commonly found growing on hedge plants, has lost its chlorophyll and leaves in the course of evolution. It derives its nutrition from the host plant, which it parasitizes. The female mosquito is not considered a parasite, although it needs our blood for reproduction. Can you explain why? In contrast, endoparasites are those that live inside the host body at different sites: liver, kidney, lungs, red blood cells, etc. The life cycles of endoparasite are more complex because of their extreme specialization. Their morphological and anatomical features are greatly simplified while emphasizing their reproductive potential. Brood parasitism in birds is a fascinating example of parasitism in which the parasitic bird lays its eggs in the nest of its host and lets the host incubate them. During the course of evolution, the egg of the parasitic bird have evolved to resemble the host's egg in size and color to reduce the chances of the host bird detecting the foreign eggs and ejecting them from the nest. Try to follow the movement of the cuckoo, that is quail, and the crow in your neighborhood park during the breeding season, spring to summer, and watch brood parasitism in action. Number 4, commensalism. This is the interaction in which one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. An orchid growing as an epiphyte on a mango branch and barnacles growing on the back of a whale benefit while neither the mango tree nor the whale derives any apparent benefit. The cattle ergot and grazing cattle in close association, a sight you are most likely to catch if you live in farmed rural areas, is a classic example of commensalisms. The egrets always forage closely to where the cattle are grazing because the cattle, as they move, stir up and flush out insects from the vegetation that otherwise might be difficult for the egrets to find and catch. Another example of commensalism is the interaction between sea anemone that has stinging tentacles and the clownfish that lives among them. The fish gets protection from predators which stay away from the stinging tentacles. The anemone does not appear to derive any benefit by hosting the clownfish. Number 5, mutualism. This interaction confers benefits on both the interacting species. Lichens represent an intimate mutualistic relationships between a fungus and photosynthesizing algae or cyanobacteria. Similarly, the mycorrhizae are association between fungi and the roots of higher plants. The fungi help the plant in the absorption of essential nutrients from the soil, while the plant in turn provides the fungi with energy yielding carbohydrates. The most spectacular and evolutionarily fascinating examples of mutualism are found in plant animal relationships. Plants need the help of animals for pollinating their flowers and dispersing their seeds. Animals obviously have to be paid fees for the services that plants expect from them. Plants offer rewards or fees in the form of pollen and nectar for pollinators and juicy and nutritious fruits for seed dispersers. But the mutually beneficial system should also be safeguarded against cheaters, for example, animals that try to steal nectar without aiding in pollination. Now you can see why plant-animal interactions often involve a coevolution of the mutualist. That is, the evolutions of the flower and its pollinator species are tightly linked with one another. In many species of fig trees, there is a tight one-to-one relationship with the pollinator species of figure 11.4. It means that a given fig species can be pollinated only by its partner wasp species and no other species. The female wasp uses the fruit not only as an oviposition, that is egg laying site, but uses the developing seeds within the fruit for nourishing its larva. The wasp pollinates the fig inflorescence while searching for suitable egg laying sites. In return for the favor of pollination, the fig offers the wasp some of the developing seeds as food for the developing wasp larva. Orchids show a bewildering diversity of floral patterns, many of which have evolved to attract the right pollinator insects, bees and bumblebees, and ensure guaranteed pollination by it. Figure 11.5. Not all orchids offer rewards. The Mediterranean orchid Ophrys employs sexual deceit to get pollination done by a species of bee. One petal of its flower bears an uncanny resemblance to the female of the bee in size, color, and markings. The male bee is attracted to what it perceives as a female, pseudocopulates with the flower, and during that process is dusted with pollen from the flower. When this same bee pseudocopulates with another flower, it transfers pollen to it and thus pollinates the flower. Here you can see how coevolution operates. If the female bee's color patterns change even slightly for any reason during evolution, pollination success will be reduced unless the orchid flower co-evolves to maintain the resemblance of its petal to the female bee.